All right, Battletech enthusiasts, fellow mech warriors, let's look at some Battletech exploits. And when I say exploits, what I mean by that is from the perspective of wargaming systems stress points. And previously I pushed up to the Wargaming Tactica 101 some examples of what wargaming stress points are. There's this idea, you and I are sitting down to play Battletech, to play that narrative, and the rules are there to capture that narrative in a tabletop format. They define what we can do, what we can't do, how the different technologies blend together. So this way, understanding the rules as best we can, and occasionally I do have to look stuff up, we have an idea of what's going to happen, what you can do, what I can do, and we can build some tactica on that. Compare that, and yes, before I say this, Battletech is a role-playing game, but you have a GM, a game master, running those calculations. Battletech is not a role-playing game. Tabletop Battletech as a war game is well-defined. Role-playing games, what you can do or can't do is determined by the rules, yes, but also by a GM, or if it's Dungeons and Dragons, by a dungeon master. They kind of make those calculations with what's possible, modified by the dice and the characters and the rules. So there's this idea of a strict war game where within that simulation, and some rule systems like Battletech do it very, very well, solid, tight, there's not that many exploits. Others like Chain of Command and God Tier are very well put together. And a few like Warhammer 40,000, well, there's lots and lots of exploits that just are not going to be fixed. So there's this idea of stress points where as we move through the rules, certain things simulating an element in that narrative, in that game, they kind of break down a little bit. And under a normal load, they work. But if you put a little stress on them, then all of a sudden they kind of fall apart. And it gives you an advantage. It gives you an exploit. It gives you something to utilize. All raw, rules as written. Is it rules as intended? Perhaps, perhaps not. Now, there is this social contract where we're sitting down to play a game, and sometimes there's house rules to address some of these stress points. Other times in competitive play where it's like, look, just bring the best that you can. Certainly, it's raw, rules as written. This is what you can do. So I mentioned these stress points, certainly not as a way of slagging Battletech. I love Battletech. It's an important part of my gaming life, and it's allowed me to meet and make so many new friends. And I'm going to share an upcoming project that I'm working on, Battletech project. It does involve tanks. It does not involve mechs. And I'm not sneaking in. I'm not sneaking in an urban mech. I'm going to try and hold back from that. But from that perspective, these rules exploits, they're there. So two to point out for Battletech to be aware of. So if you're playing competitively or you want to house rule it, two areas where Battletech begins to fall apart is this idea of initiative. Now, we talked about initiative sinks last week where you have your forces, I have my forces. We move back and forth piece by piece. If I outnumber you, I'll double up or triple up. And essentially, initiative being 1-to-1, taking units like infantry, taking lots of smaller units that might be static or you don't really care about, like mechs. So even if I have a piece that's outnumbered, if I'm surrounded by 3 mechs, I've got your 3 mechs surrounding my 3 mechs. It's a Warhammer. I always love a Warhammer. You have my Warhammer surrounded. Normally, win or lose initiative, I'm in trouble. But if I've got like 10 stands of infantry for a mere couple of hundred battle value, then doesn't matter win or lose. I'm going to move all those, as in I'm not going to move them, and you're going to have to activate your other pieces, and at least that Warhammer's going to have a choice to go last. Where if you're playing mechs versus mechs or more kind of equal without these initiative sinks, then there's the very real possibility, win initiative, I'm still kind of outnumbered. Where do I go? What do I do? Now, initiative is important in Battletech. It's very dynamic. It's a great simulation in the rules. It simulates reaction time. It simulates processing time. There's things you can do like a mobile HQ. Pushed that up to the archives under the Battletech playlist. And other electronic pieces, depending on the tech level, that can change your initiative or act out of it. And I like it. It's not just you go, I go. It's a back and forth, very much representing that, hey, this is not a static combat. These mechs are very, very dynamic. But it is a stress point where things begin to fall apart. Secondary stress point. If we look at some wargaming systems, you have a unit, you have an element. And that element can almost fire 360 degrees everywhere. If we think of like a group of infantry, they can fire 360 degrees. So it really doesn't matter their positioning, and they can engage almost from anywhere and kind of bounce back and forth. In Battletech, one of the rule stress points, and again, this is the narrative, facing. Much like armored combat, the facing is very important. What are the locations of your weapons? You have a primary facing, which is straight. You have a left or right secondary facing, which might have some weapons in range with the firing arc, might not. And maybe you're kind of a quirky mech like a Battlemaster or a Dragon where you've got something rear facing. And of course, that small laser in the head, which we always forget about to fire. Facing is very, very important. Well, this is something that you can potentially exploit with or without initiative or based on moves, where it's kind of like the old thing, could a light mech defeat an assault mech? Well, if I keep on running and moving, I'm fast enough that I can always potentially stay out of your facing. Now, mission objectives might dictate otherwise, but what we see is building a list or taking units or mechs that can really mess around with facing, that can be in a place where I'm out of your facing or I can move around. That exploit, the rules kind of break down. The mechs can't move fast enough to adjust that, to address that. And this isn't just like ponderous assault mechs or heavy mechs. This is any type of mech design. So from that perspective, and I mean, that's the whole reason for the hexes and the hex base, to determine it. And it's a very important part of Battletech, because the facing of your weapons on these ponderous war machines, yes, absolutely. But these are two examples of what we see where with Battletech, as you move through the rules, they're trying to simulate something and they break down a little bit, or they can be overloaded a little bit. And again, I mention this as a way just to understand, and ultimately it's up to you to decide as a player, is this something we house rule? Or is this something that we reasonably do? I mean, look, we've all thought of and maybe played those 50 Savannah Masters or taking like 10 Saladin tanks or dozens and dozens of warriors on the table. I'll always fight something like that. If you've painted the miniatures up and you're ready to play, then you've paid your price of admission. Absolutely. I'll take on all those lists. Absolutely. But does that really reflect inner sphere arms? Does that really select and represent the truth of what you would be facing in that narrative? Because in Battletech, I'm a competitive player, but I'm also a narrative player. Well, Fritz, I counter that because, look, not only did I bring my 50 Savannah Masters and my 20 Warrior helicopters that come in at a battle value of like 1,000 or less, I actually made a terrain piece. It's a factory. It's an automated factory, and that's what you're fighting over. That just happens to produce these two pieces of military hardware. So we're just pumping them out and emptying the showrooms. Hey, that's the narrative. Let's roll some dice. Let's see what happens. Let's see what we can do. But just bringing them to exploit these rules weaknesses, that's something to be aware of. All right, I'm going to turn it over to you guys. Rules stress points in Battletech. What are some of the aspects that we need to be aware of? And again, this is not just found in Battletech. This is trying to take rules as written, simulate a scenario, have a template that you and I can play without a GM or kind of a referee. And I've posted up to my Wargaming Tactica playlist here on the channel 3 examples and a couple of examples of rules exploits, how you can use them, if so inclined, but in doing so, to be aware of them, so you're not taken by surprise or by that person at the gaming club. They're not trying to utilize this on you without you knowing.